The restaurant was alive with a soft, haunting jazz that floated like smoke across the polished marble floors. Crystal glasses chimed against each other in delicate dances. Conversations curled and drifted in hushed whispers, a river of polite voices that never dared to disturb the perfect order. Jamal moved through it all like a shadow made of quiet focus, balancing plates and trays with the precision of a man who had learned to vanish into the background. Every step was careful, measured, a dance choreographed by years of knowing when to speak and when to disappear. And yet, tonight, nothing he had practiced could prepare him for what was coming. Vincent Lang entered as if the room existed only to mark his arrival. A tailored suit hugged his frame, each line cutting through the dim, golden glow like a blade. The chatter dulled for a heartbeat as he strode past tables, fingers brushing against the backs of chairs, eyes that appraised everything as if life itself were a ledger, and he alone held the balance. He scanned the room with the ease of a predator, and then, like a hawk locking onto a mouse, his gaze landed on Jamal. A slow smirk spread across Vincent's face, sharp and cruel, and the air seemed to condense around the table he approached. "You'll never be me," he said, his voice a mixture of amusement and venom, leaning casually against the edge of the table as if the world itself bowed to his presence. Jamal froze mid-step. The words struck him like an invisible whip, leaving a sting that burned across his skin and sank into his chest. Other diners felt it too, subtle ripples of tension that pulsed through the air. A fork paused mid-air. A glass wavered in the hand of a nervous patron, but no one dared speak. Jamal's hands trembled slightly as he carried the next tray, the porcelain plates suddenly heavier than the weight of the room itself. Inside, a storm raged, anger and humiliation clashing with disbelief and a quiet, simmering pride. He wanted to speak, to spit back the words that had cut him down, but he held himself in check. His silence was a fortress, more powerful than any words he could muster. Vincent laughed, sharp and cruel, a sound that echoed in the polished hall like a judge's gavel sentencing him to invisibility. Every movement felt measured, every breath deliberate. Jamal's feet barely made a sound on the marble as he navigated the maze of tables, yet each step carried the weight of the insult that now clung to his shoulders. The silver trays seemed to weigh tons, and he fought the urge to throw them down, to let the humiliation break through his composed exterior. Inside, his mind replayed the smirk, the condescension, the way Vincent had assumed superiority without even knowing him. The injustice burned, hot and unrelenting. It wasn't the first time a man like Vincent had tried to remind him of the barriers built by wealth and power, but tonight, the sting cut deeper than usual. When the last table was cleared, Jamal disappeared into the kitchen, the bright fluorescent lights harsh against his eyes. He leaned against the cold tile wall, silent, letting the quiet wash over him. The other staff moved past him, their chatter a soft murmur he barely registered. In the solitude of the kitchen, the humiliation twisted into determination. This was not just a personal affront, it was a reminder of the world's indifference, a system designed to keep men like him in the shadows. He clenched his fists, feeling the tension in his shoulders, and for the first time, he allowed himself to imagine a different path. That night, walking home beneath flickering streetlights, Jamal's mind was a storm. The city seemed quieter, almost complicit, as if it knew the weight of what had transpired and offered no comfort. The sidewalks glimmered with puddles reflecting neon signs, distorted and broken like the self-image Vincent had tried to fracture. Every step echoed against the pavement, each one a small defiance, a reminder that he was moving forward even under the gaze of a man who thought himself untouchable. The sting of Vincent's arrogance clung to him, but somewhere beneath it, a spark flickered, an awareness that confrontation was rarely the end. Sometimes it was the beginning. Memories of the restaurant replayed like a silent film in his mind. Vincent leaning casually, eyes cold, smirk sharp, as if the world's rules were written for him alone. Jamal's silence, though, had been louder than any shout, sharper than any retort. It was a silent message, one that whispered not weakness but the quiet power of endurance. He thought of his parents, their sacrifices, the nights they had gone without so he could chase dreams. The lessons embedded in his blood now surged through him. Dignity cannot be borrowed, respect cannot be demanded, and true power often wears no suit. As he passed the corner where the old bookstore still stood, Jamal paused. He remembered the first time he had set foot in a place like the Marquette, eyes wide with both awe and disbelief. Back then, he had imagined himself serving endless tables, polishing floors, fading into the background. Now he understood something vital. The world would always try to assign roles, to remind men like him of their place, but the measure of a person was not in the words spat at them. It was in how they carried themselves through the storm. The city around him hummed with indifferent life. Horns blared, late-night workers trudged home, neon lights flickered, and somewhere above, a siren wailed. Jamal's mind, though, was elsewhere. He envisioned the restaurant, the tables, the smugness in Vincent's eyes. He saw himself not as the invisible waiter, but as someone who could shape his own destiny. The smirk he had carried in his chest all evening, the quiet burn of insult, transformed into fuel. He imagined the day he would walk back through those doors, not as a servant, not as someone overlooked, but as someone who had reclaimed the power the world thought it owned. When he finally reached his apartment, the faint hum of the city still seeped through the cracked windows. He sat on the edge of the bed, letting his body relax while his mind raced. Injustice, he realized, didn't just wound. It demanded action, it demanded acknowledgement, and sometimes it demanded patience. Jamal's hands rested on his knees, trembling slightly still, but this time not from fear or shame. It was the tremor of possibility, the pulse of a future where no man could ever casually tell him who he could or could not be. The lesson was clear. Power is not given, it is revealed, earned, and sometimes quietly taken. Somewhere Vincent Lang probably laughed that night, unaware that his words had planted a seed. Jamal, walking beneath streetlights, feeling the city pulse beneath his feet, understood that humiliation could be a catalyst. That one smirk, that cruel voice, had been an invitation to rise, not a verdict. And though the night held shadows, Jamal's mind burned with light, the promise of something greater, the inevitability of a reversal no man could anticipate. The city was large, the world indifferent, but he had discovered a truth larger than either. Dignity is unassailable, respect is earned, and no amount of arrogance can claim a soul determined to claim its own destiny. And in that quiet, lingering moment before sleep finally took him, Jamal made a silent vow. The confrontation had not been an ending, it was a beginning. And when the time came, the world and men like Vincent would finally see that power, true power, does not always wear a suit, and it certainly cannot be dictated by a single arrogant smirk. Days bled into weeks, and Vincent Lang became a constant shadow in the restaurant, his presence a sharp reminder of the power Jamal was supposed to bow to. Every visit was a performance, every word a test. Vincent's tailored suits cut through the soft golden lights like knives, and his eyes swept across the room as if measuring who belonged and who didn't. Orders were barked, sharp and impatient. Compliments dripped with contempt, carefully designed to sting. Jamal carried tray after tray, his movements precise, almost surgical, like he was gliding through a minefield of ego and arrogance. Each step demanded restraint, each breath required control. The hum of conversation, the clinking of glasses, even the soft jazz, all of it became the background to his silent endurance. Behind closed doors, the staff whispered, their voices low and heavy with judgment. "You'll never rise above this," one said, voice thick with doubt, as if it were a truth carved in stone. Jamal heard them, of course. He heard the murmurs, the shared glances, the quiet skepticism that floated like smoke around the kitchen and hallways, but his eyes remained steady, unbroken. In those quiet moments between tables, he memorized every detail. The way a napkin folded, the way a glass reflected the light, the way customers' eyes lingered when they felt truly seen. He moved through the restaurant like a ghost, unseen but essential, a presence so integral that the hum of the place faltered when he was absent. He learned every nuance, every habit, every pattern, not just of the patrons, but of the place itself. It was his stage, even if the world insisted he be invisible. One evening, the restaurant buzzed with anticipation. A high-profile investor had been invited for a tasting, his laughter filling the corners of the room like a harsh echo. Jamal approached with a menu suggestion, something subtle, a small improvement that could elevate a dish, sharpen a flavor, make the experience feel seamless. He spoke carefully, each word measured. Perhaps we could enhance the seared salmon with a lighter beurre blanc, just enough to balance the richness. The investor's laugh cut across the table like glass breaking. "Do you even understand what this business is?" He sneered, eyes cold, body leaning back in an expensive chair. The room seemed to tighten, a collective breath held, waiting for Jamal to falter, to shrink, to apologize. But he didn't. His voice was calm, controlled, carrying no fear. "I understand respect and quality, sir," he said softly. "That's what keeps people coming back." A hush fell over the table, a ripple of disbelief passing through those who had expected submission. Vincent's smirk faltered for just a fraction of a second, imperceptible to anyone but Jamal. The subtle tension hung in the air like smoke. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but it was a shift, a crack in the invisible walls of arrogance and superiority that had been pressing down on him for weeks. Jamal returned to his duties, tray in hand, eyes forward, but inside, a quiet fire had ignited. The insult, the derision, the expectation that he remained small, each of them became fuel. Each day was a test of endurance. Patrons offered small slights disguised as questions. Servers whispered judgments about him. Vincent's visits were calculated, his presence a constant reminder that wealth and power could speak louder than character. Yet Jamal moved with a dignity that could not be mocked or diminished. He cleaned tables meticulously, remembered every name, every preference, every subtle cue that made the restaurant feel like a living, breathing organism under his care. To the casual eye, he was just a waiter, someone to carry plates and refill glasses. But to anyone paying attention, he was the heartbeat of the place, the quiet force holding it together. There were nights when the weight of expectation pressed down so heavily that fatigue was almost physical. Every insult, every snide remark piled upon him, threatening to break him. And yet Jamal endured. His silence became a shield. His restraint became more than survival, it became a quiet rebellion. In the way he moved, in the precision of his actions, in the small nods of acknowledgement he offered the patrons, there was a defiance that no one could see, yet it radiated from him with quiet power. Vincent could command the room, the investor could sneer, the whispers could echo, but they could not touch the core of Jamal's character. One evening, as Jamal polished silverware in the dim light of the empty dining room, he allowed himself a small, private moment. The reflections in the glassware shimmered, distorted and fractured, yet beautiful. He thought about the weeks that had passed, the laughter, the sneers, the endless reminders of who he was supposed to be, and he thought about who he actually was. There was a quiet satisfaction in knowing that his dignity remained intact. He had not bowed, had not been broken. The world had tried to label him, to assign him a place and a role that was beneath him, and yet he had navigated it all with grace. It was in those small, invisible victories that Jamal found strength. Each time a patron smiled because of his attention to detail. Each time a customer remembered his name. Each time he handled an insult with quiet authority rather than sharp retaliation. The rebellion was subtle but undeniable. It was in the calm in his voice, the unwavering precision of his work, the patience that carried him through the night. Power, he realized, did not always need to roar. Sometimes it simply endured, silent and unshakable, waiting for the moment it could be recognized. Jamal's nights were long, and his walks home beneath flickering streetlights became a time for reflection. He thought about Vincent, about the arrogance and entitlement he had faced, and about the lessons buried in every smirk, every comment, every patron who underestimated him. The world had tried to define him by what he carried in his hands or by the uniform he wore, but he carried something far more valuable, his own integrity. It was unshakable, invisible to those who did not look, but potent enough to withstand the sharpest insults. By the end of the week, something had begun to shift. Staff who had once whispered behind his back began to watch him differently. Patrons noticed the calm authority, the quiet competence, the ability to move through the restaurant like a force they could not name but instinctively respected. Even Vincent, sharp-eyed and used to command, began to recognize the subtleties of Jamal's presence. There was something in the way he moved, in the way he held himself, that could not be bought or mocked. It was dignity embodied, quiet yet undeniable. And so Jamal continued, day after day, each insult, each sneer, each dismissive comment like water against stone. It chipped away at nothing. His restraint became a kind of armor, his precision a weapon in a battle no one else realized was being fought. Injustice did not just bruise, it demanded response, even if that response was quiet, invisible, unspoken. Jamal's rebellion was not loud. It did not need to be. It was in every careful movement, every remembered detail, every act of unseen excellence. It was a lesson in strength and in humanity. True power is not always wielded from the top. Sometimes it rises quietly from the bottom, unrecognized until it cannot be ignored. By the time Vincent left the restaurant that night, smirking as if he had won yet another small victory, Jamal's eyes were steady, his posture unbroken. Inside, a fire burned, a quiet, controlled flame, one that knew its own worth. The world could try to diminish him. It could try to mock and belittle, but dignity, once earned, could never be taken. Jamal walked home under the streetlights, head held high, knowing that endurance, patience, and quiet resistance were often more powerful than any display of wealth or arrogance. He had survived the week. More than survived, he had remained himself. And somewhere deep inside, Jamal felt it, the first flicker of a shift. Something larger was beginning, a change that no investor, no billionaire, no whispered doubt could ever anticipate. It would not be loud, it would not be sudden, but it would come. And when it did, those who thought themselves untouchable would discover that power was not always dictated by money, and respect was never granted, it was earned. The Friday evening air felt different the moment Jamal arrived at the restaurant. There was the usual hum of patrons, the soft jazz curling through the room, the subtle clatter of silverware, but something in the atmosphere was charged, almost electric. The staff moved with a little more tension, their eyes flicking toward the manager's desk like everyone knew something was about to shift. Jamal walked in, steady, composed, as if he owned the very air around him, though tonight that would, in fact, be the truth. The moment Vincent Lang stepped through the glass doors, perfectly dressed, perfectly arrogant, perfectly expecting the world to bend at his arrival, the room seemed to pause. Waiters froze mid-step. Patrons glanced up from their menus, sensing a storm before it even arrived. Vincent's eyes swept across the room, landing, as always, on Jamal. A smirk tugged at his lips, sharp, confident, full of entitlement. He moved toward his usual table with the grace of someone accustomed to command, a man who believed he could bend any room to his will. The staff braced themselves. Jamal carried plates past, his calm demeanor unchanged. But then Vincent noticed something on the manager's desk, a glossy envelope, heavy and embossed, catching the golden glow of the chandeliers. He stepped closer, curiosity mixed with his usual arrogance. He picked it up, his brow furrowing, lips parting. The room seemed to shrink, the air tightening around him. "Excuse me," Vincent's voice wavered, disbelief cutting through the usual confidence. His eyes darted up, scanning Jamal's calm, unflinching face. Jamal finally spoke, his voice smooth and steady, carrying the weight of every insult endured, every sneer ignored, every moment of silent perseverance. "I own this place," he said, each word deliberate, each syllable weighted with truth. "Every table you sit at, every dish you've scoffed at, it belongs to me." The words landed like hammers, reverberating through the polished walls, through the crystal glasses, through the stunned silence of every patron and staff member alike. The power dynamics shifted in that instant, invisible tectonic plates moving beneath the surface. Vincent's smirk faltered, a flicker of confusion crossing his face, replaced quickly by humiliation. He blinked, as though the words had come from nowhere, as though reality itself had betrayed him. His carefully constructed arrogance, the armor he wore for decades, was cracking under the weight of an invisible truth. The man he had dismissed, the man he had mocked, the man he had believed to be beneath him, was the one holding the reins all along. Staff who had watched Vincent strut into the room week after week, eyes full of entitlement, mouths curled in unearned confidence, now stared in awe. Whispers rippled through the kitchen, soft as silk yet sharp as knives. It's him, he owns it. He was, he is. No one could speak it aloud at first. The realization hung in the room like smoke, thick, uncontainable, impossible to ignore. Every action Vincent had taken over the past weeks, every dismissive glance, every cruel comment, now reflected back on him with blinding clarity. And there, standing calm, composed, almost serene, was Jamal, the man who had endured it all, the man who had let every insult, every slight, every humiliation become a lesson, a strategy, a quiet power. Vincent's face turned pale, the sharpness of his jawline dulled by disbelief. He took a step back, as though the room itself had shifted beneath him, the weight of his arrogance crashing into the immovable reality of Jamal's triumph. The patrons watched silently, captivated, some whispering, some staring, all sensing that they were witnessing a rare moment of justice, the kind that unfolds slowly, elegantly, with the subtle poetry of inevitability. Jamal's hands, steady as ever, rested lightly at his sides. There was no triumph in his voice, no gloating, no need to rub the victory in the man's face. The power was in the silence, in the calm, in the unshakable presence of a man who had known his own worth when no one else did. He walked past tables with the quiet confidence of someone who had finally been recognized by the world he had long served invisibly. Every chair, every table, every plate he had handled with precision, every minor act of care that went unnoticed for months, now carried a weight of significance that no one could deny. The realization struck Vincent like a hammer. The world he had thought belonged to him, the hierarchy he assumed was absolute, was now flipped. Jamal had not raised his voice, had not demanded attention, had not plotted loudly. He had moved through the world with patience, with precision, with dignity, and it had carried him to the top of a stage that no arrogance could have bought. Vincent attempted to speak, words fumbling, voice tight, but Jamal's calm gaze silenced him before any apology or excuse could be formed. There was a stillness in the air that no one could name, a pause in the rhythm of the restaurant that resonated louder than any clatter of dishes. Jamal's smile was quiet, almost imperceptible, a subtle acknowledgement of what had been accomplished. It was the kind of smile that spoke of hard work, of perseverance, of quiet strategy, of the understanding that the world, with all its arrogance, cannot ignore talent, integrity, or resolve. The staff, who had witnessed weeks of insult, the sneers, the condescension, now looked at Jamal not just as a colleague, but as something greater, a symbol of dignity unbroken, a lesson in patience and resilience. Patrons, some who had always assumed the servers existed only to serve, saw it too, a truth revealed in real time. Appearances and assumptions are fragile, but character, determination, and respect are unmovable. Jamal moved through the dining room like the conductor of a symphony, invisible threads now in his hands, guiding the flow of the room, the movement of people, the atmosphere itself. Vincent, pale, humiliated, unsure of how to navigate a world where his assumptions no longer held, retreated to the edge of the room, a man confronted by the reality that the world does not always belong to those who shout the loudest or wear the finest suits. Power, it seemed, could be quiet, deliberate, and earned in ways that arrogance could never anticipate. The moment stretched, fragile and electric. Jamal did not gloat, did not revel in the humiliation of the man who had tried to diminish him. He only smiled, calm, confident, subtle, and in that smile was a lesson. Talent, perseverance, and dignity could flip even the most arrogant hierarchy. Injustice and arrogance might test a man, but they cannot define him. The quiet, patient, relentless pursuit of excellence could do what anger, force, or entitlement never could. Vincent left that night with a lesson seared into his consciousness, one he could not escape. And the restaurant, alive with soft jazz and murmuring patrons, had witnessed more than a shift in power. It had witnessed a moral reckoning, a truth unfolding without drama, without spectacle, yet more powerful than any display of wealth or force. Jamal continued his work, his presence calm, composed, unshakable, a living testament to the idea that real authority is measured not by arrogance, but by the quiet mastery of one's own destiny. By the time the night ended, every plate cleared, every patron satisfied, the lesson had settled into the room like a soft but unbreakable pulse. Dignity is unassailable, respect is earned, and true power, when guided by patience and talent, cannot be ignored. Jamal had not just survived the tests of arrogance, he had transcended them. And in that quiet, almost invisible victory, he became more than a waiter, more than a man overlooked. He became a force, a symbol, a reminder that the world's assumptions can always be challenged, and that sometimes the quietest victories are the most powerful of all. Vincent Lang sat frozen for a moment, the weight of disbelief still pressing against him like a physical force. The arrogance that had carried him through boardrooms, gala events, and social hierarchies seemed to crumble under the realization that the man he had dismissed, mocked, and assumed to be beneath him was the one who held the power tonight. His tailored suit felt suddenly hollow, the confidence that had never failed him now fragile and exposed. He looked around, seeing the staff whispering in awe, the patrons wide-eyed and silent, the very atmosphere of the restaurant bending quietly toward a new truth. The empire of assumed superiority he had built in his mind was collapsing, replaced by a painful, human lesson he had refused to see until now. Wealth, status, and bravado are hollow when they are not paired with respect and character. Jamal moved toward him, calm, deliberate, unshaken. Every step he took was a quiet assertion of dignity, a statement louder than any words could carry. He extended his hand, not with prideful triumph, not with vengeance or gloating, but with the quiet confidence of someone who had earned his place without needing to crush others along the way. The gesture was simple, yet its impact was immense, an embodiment of restraint, of measured power, of the unspoken knowledge that true authority comes from mastery of oneself, not dominance over others. Vincent's eyes, once sharp and mocking, softened slightly as he hesitated, realizing for the first time the magnitude of what he had overlooked in his arrogance. "You can't belittle someone and expect to stay unchallenged," Jamal said softly, his voice steady, carrying the weight of weeks of endurance and silent preparation. "Respect is earned, not assumed." There was no malice in the words, only truth, clear and unwavering. The statement reverberated through the room, settling in the minds of every observer. It was a lesson in humility, but also in the quiet power of resilience, a reminder that character cannot be bought, borrowed, or faked. Vincent, whose entire life had been steeped in the assumptions that money equates to authority, felt the sting of recognition. He realized that for all his wealth, for all his carefully curated influence, he had underestimated a man whose strength was invisible until revealed at the perfect moment. The restaurant seemed to exhale around them. The soft jazz that had always floated through the space now felt like a soundtrack to the shift of power that had taken place, subtle but undeniable. Patrons resumed their murmured conversations, staff returned to their duties, but a quiet reverence lingered in the air. Every glance toward Jamal carried acknowledgement. Every nod and whispered comment contained respect, the kind earned through unwavering integrity rather than titles or appearances. The transformation of the room was not dramatic in gestures or theatrics. It was cinematic in its subtlety, the way a tidal wave rises quietly before breaking on the shore. Jamal's victory was complete not because he had humiliated Vincent, but because he had remained himself, untouched in character, unshaken by cruelty or condescension. Vincent, for his part, rose from his chair slowly, each movement heavy with the weight of introspection. The arrogance that had once defined him now felt fragile, hollow, exposed. He took a step toward the exit, then paused, glancing back at Jamal. In that glance was acknowledgement, faint and hesitant, but unmistakable. He left the restaurant with the sound of the door closing behind him, a physical punctuation to a moment that had forever altered his understanding of power and respect. The hum of life in the restaurant returned to normal, or as normal as it could feel after witnessing such a quiet but profound shift. Jamal resumed his work, methodical and steady, his hands polishing glasses, arranging plates, moving among tables with the same care and precision that had always defined him. But the work no longer felt like endurance. It no longer carried the weight of humiliation or the sting of insult. Instead, it was a continuation of the strength that had always been within him, a commitment to service paired with integrity, a quiet assertion that true power lies in how you carry yourself in the face of adversity. Each smile he offered a patron, each thoughtful adjustment to a chair or placement of a plate, each remembered preference, became a declaration of his philosophy. Greatness is measured not by how much you take from the world, but by how much you give back without compromising who you are. As the evening wore on, the restaurant hummed with life, laughter spilling like golden light across polished floors, the soft clinking of glasses punctuating conversations like punctuation marks in a symphony of human interaction. Jamal moved through the space with effortless grace, unobserved by most, but commanding attention in ways no one could articulate. The kingdom he had quietly built was not one of wealth or privilege. It was one of resilience, earned respect, and the courage to rise above the doubts and dismissals of others. Patrons felt it without knowing why, staff felt it without understanding the full measure of its weight. It was a presence, a lesson embedded in every small detail of the environment, in every gesture, every choice, every unspoken assertion of dignity. Jamal's eyes lingered on the diners, watching laughter ripple across tables, the subtle way a customer leaned back, satisfied and at ease. He allowed himself a small smile, quiet, almost imperceptible, for it was not for pride or vindication. It was acknowledgement of the journey he had endured, the insults, the snide remarks, the repeated attempts to diminish him. Each trial had been transformed into fuel, each dismissal turned into a step toward something far greater than recognition alone. He had learned, as everyone eventually must, that power without respect is fragile, and that true greatness is measured not by titles or appearances, but by the courage to persist, the patience to endure, and the integrity to remain unbroken. Outside, the city stretched on, indifferent yet witness to countless struggles of ambition, dignity, and resilience. Jamal stepped briefly into the quiet night, the glow of streetlights reflecting in puddles from an earlier rain. He breathed deeply, the air carrying the faint scent of possibility, the subtle affirmation that he had not only survived, but transcended the challenges set before him. The moral of the night was unmistakable, clear as the lights shimmering on the wet pavement. Arrogance and entitlement may demand attention, but they cannot claim the essence of a man who knows his own worth. Respect must be earned. Power without humility is empty. And in the quiet endurance of those who refuse to be broken, true greatness is revealed. By the time Jamal returned to the restaurant, the night was deep but alive. Patrons lingered, servers moved with subtle efficiency, and the soft music continued to wind its way through the room. Jamal picked up a tray, carrying it with the same care, the same precision, the same calm that had defined him from the start. Nothing had changed in the external rhythm of the restaurant, yet everything had changed in the balance of power, in the acknowledgement of what dignity, patience, and perseverance could achieve. Vincent's absence was a shadow that marked the victory not as spectacle, but as quiet truth. And in that soft, electric, golden-lit space, the moral was undeniable. The world may attempt to belittle, to dismiss, to rank by money and status, but true authority rests in the character that withstands it all. Jamal continued his work, serene, composed, unshakable, a man who had not just endured injustice, but had transformed it into a kingdom built not on privilege, but on the unyielding power of respect, service, and integrity. In that kingdom, laughter and life echoed louder than wealth, humility triumphed over arrogance, and the quiet, steady courage of one man reminded everyone present that true greatness lies not in what is taken, but in what is preserved. Dignity, perseverance, and the courage to rise above those who doubt you.